Hi, as you can see on the slide, my name is Erica Bradbury. I'm a PHP developer at Maiden, and I'm going to talk about Postman. I used Postman recently on an in-house OAuth server project when we were developing the API. I had used it before, but that was years ago as a Chrome browser extension. So this was the first time I was using the standalone native application, version 7, with all the new toys and features. And I was quite impressed, so I thought I'd share some of that tonight. It was also, incidentally, the first time I'd used their group workspaces. So we had the whole dev team set up on a group workspace so we could all share and edit the same collections without having to go through all the exporting and importing of API requests. Because this is a lightning talk, there is an awful lot of cool stuff that Postman can do, which is listed here, but we're going to focus on the top two, which is looking at how we can use the tools to make nice API request collections using things like environment variables and request chaining. And then we're also going to look at automated tests and pre-request scripts and how that fits in, which are the things I spent most of the time on doing the OAuth server. Right, I think Postman's pretty user-friendly. That might not be quite true, what Lawrence there is saying, but I think it's close to true. If you use it intelligently, then you can save yourself an awful lot of work. This next slide is a list of all the things I was going to tell you about, but rather than sitting here and talking through the slide, I thought I'd take the bull by the horns and do a demo. And because OAuth APIs aren't very interesting, unless you're into that kind of thing, then we're actually going to use the Pokemon API, which is a public API that's out there that gives you information about Pokemon. Has everybody here already seen Postman or used Postman, at least in the Chrome browser? Yeah, so you're pretty familiar with the layout. Just in case anybody hasn't, you've got a sidebar showing the collection of API requests. This top section is where you set up the API request. So you've got a GET request, a URL, and you can set parameters, authorization, headers, body. And when you send it, the response you get back is displayed in the bottom half of the screen, and you can look at body, cookies, headers, and test results will come back to. Right, so the first thing I discovered while doing the OAuth work was header presets. Just a little time saver. You can set up header presets for groups of headers that you frequently want to use. So if I come to this Pokemon request to look at Pikachu details, and I say standard JSON accepts headers, voila, I get all my JSON accept headers in one click. That's quite cool. The second thing is the search in the body. If when you get your data back, it turns out that there's an awful lot of information about Pikachu, and you're looking for something in particular, if you click on the little search icon there, you can zero in on any string search, and not only string searches. If you press the orange button, which I've got highlighted there, you can use regex search as well, which is actually really handy. Saved me a lot of time. Right, the next thing I was going to talk about is environments. And if you haven't already used environment variables, global variables, and setting up environments in Postman, I definitely recommend you do, because this is a huge time saver. It makes everything much more reusable and maintainable. And it also lets you use some of the more advanced features like request chaining and more sophisticated test scripts and things like that. So environment variables and global variables, they're just key value pairs, they're variables. And you can see what environment, active environment you're using up here in the top right. So we've got an environment here, poke API public. If you want to see what's in there, click the eye and you get a view of all your environment variables and global variables. The difference with global variables is they're available everywhere, whereas environment variables are a bit more restricted because you can only have one environment active at any one time in Postman. So an example here, we've got, you can probably see in double curly brackets here, base URL. If I hover, I can see the value. We used this approach when we were doing the OAuth server. We set up originally the dev environment as an environment and matched all the values to the dev server. And then we were able to reuse the whole set of requests really easily by just setting up a test server environment and swapping the values accordingly. So it's a real time saver. And there's another feature that goes together nicely with it. I don't know how many of you have clicked down here before, but it's actually got a really nice search and replace. So I've set up a search here to look for V2 because the Pokemon API is the V2 API. If they bring out a V3 API, I can narrow down my search and then enter a search and replace, and with a single click, set it all up. And you can duplicate requests, you can duplicate environments, so you can see how you could quickly duplicate an environment, search and replace, change the details, and that set of requests can be used against all sorts of different servers, different things. Right, I mentioned that this is also the key to using request chaining. How many people have done request chaining in Postman? Anyone? This came in handy when we were doing the OAuth server because we had an endpoint where you requested a token, and we also had an endpoint where you introspected a token to check if it was valid. And to start with, we were cutting and pasting the token values between the two requests. And then we came up with request chaining, which was a lot easier, where basically you take a value from the first request, access it, and use it dynamically in the second one. To give you an example here, in Pokemon World, if I go to the character endpoint and send a request without any parameters, then this just brings back a big list of all the Pokemon out there, 964 of them, and with URLs. Let's say you then want to set up a request to say, I want the last Pokemon on the first page of results, whatever that is. Well, that's exactly what I've done with this third request called get Pokemon character. You can see in the address bar, the only thing in there is dynamic Pokemon URL, and that's actually getting set from the script in my character endpoint call. So if I let you look at the tests tab and the pre-request script, I can't say that, tab, both JavaScript tabs, you write in JavaScript, and it's got a nice Postman sandbox API, which is what these PM dot things are. And if you look at this bit here, you can see I'm getting the response. If we have some Pokemon, which we do, hundreds of them, then take the last one and look up the URL value and then store that in an environment variable called dynamic Pokemon URL. So that's how the second request works, pulling it out of the first request. Yeah, so the next point I was going to cover, as we're on the tests tab, is tests. It's actually pretty easy to write tests. JavaScript isn't my favourite language, sorry Lucia, but as you can probably tell, writing old style. But it is actually quite a friendly interface, this. You can see on the right-hand side, we've got snippets. So they give you examples, and you can literally just click and pick some examples and edit them, or it might be the exact thing you want. Documentation's good as well, and it uses the CHAI behavior-driven development syntax, which is actually pretty friendly. So if I want to add a test to here to say I want it to be a success request, then if I click that one, don't really have to edit this, that's pretty much what I want to do. So I'm checking that the response status is 200. And if you set up all your sort of requests that you want to test out, and then you set up these tests to go with them. It's a really nice way to quickly check as you're developing, assuming this was your API you're developing, that it's all still working, and check out what's gone wrong. So you can use the test runner to do that. Every time you send a single request, it will run the tests for that request, but you can also run them all using the test runner. So if I click runner and then choose that, choose the characters folder, I've only got one folder in here, set the right environment and say run, then it's just run all my tests and they all pass, as the Pokemon API works. There's a couple of nice features in here. If you have a lot of tests, that quickly becomes quite clogged. You can go to summary view, which limits it to sort of where are there any failures within that request, rather than all the tests in that request, because there might be a lot of different tests per request. The other feature that I wanted to briefly mention is that if you do have failures and something's broken, you can actually browse quite quickly here. So if I click on character endpoint, I can get a rundown of what got sent and what came back, so you can quickly debug where the test failed from this interface. Right, just one more thing to go. I don't know how I'm doing for time. Oh no, two more, I lie. Just thought I'd mention Code Beautifier. While you're typing messy JavaScript in here, if you press Command B, it instantly beautifies it. Handy. And also, if while you're setting up these tests, it's not working, there's a console you can use. So you can see my Postman console down the bottom. If you put console log up there, and then click here to bring up the console, which I've already got showing, then you'll get your console log messages out in the console, which is, I found it mostly handy for when I was writing these tests with ropey JavaScript and trying to work out what I was doing. Right, now we really are onto the last thing, which is folder organization. Again, this is a real time saver if you think about it and set it up properly. You can see I've got a collection folder. The overall collection folder is Poke API, and then I've got a subfolder I've created called characters, and then I've got characters within that. Well, you can actually set things at the folder level, and it goes down in more granular levels so that you can override things at the higher level with stuff at the lower level. So, to give you an example, if we go up to Poke API and say edit, I could set up authorization. And if you set up authorization at the top of a folder, we did this in the OAuth. We were using basic authentication all the way down, whole sets of folders. So set it at the folder level, and then in the authorization tabs for individual requests, you just say inherit from parent. And then if you happen to want to do a different authentication, you can just override that in the individual request. So that's good. You can also set up collection level tests. So I've got tests here to say checking everything in this whole collection comes back with content type JSON and takes no more than 500 milliseconds. Those kind of very general tests that you want to apply to everything. You can set them at this level. So you can see actually when I ran my tests in here, if I just send the request and get the tests back, if I bring the window up, I only had 2 tests written in here. Go away, dictionary. But I've actually got 4 tests showing up because that's running the collection level ones as well. And you can have, as I said, folder level stuff as well. So in the folder level on this one, I think I put, I set a global variable for a JSON schema, because this JSON schema might apply to quite a lot of different endpoints in the characters folder. And I then used this global variable in my tests to do a JSON schema check basically against the response when it came back. Right, I think that genuinely is the end of the talk. I did have another couple of slides, but they were basically just useful links, so you could look those up on the slides later. And if anyone wants to come and talk to me later, I have played with some of the other features that were listed on my sort of early slides. So feel free to come and ask me a bit more if you'd like to.